Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Currin, and I'm here with Tom. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you being on the podcast with me. And so I'm really excited about talking about what you do, the books you've written, and the course that you have that you would like to teach, because I've been thinking about this forever. And when I say forever, I mean, I'm talking about 6, 8 years that I've done what we're going to talk about, but I just have never gotten there because I just don't know how to get there. So first off, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So again, Tom Leveen. Spelling is important. It's Leveen.
Mhm.
And my first novel came out in 2010 with Penguin Random House. And since then, I've written and published 9 traditional novels, with most of them with Random House or Simon & Schuster. And then I've put out a handful of other nonfiction and fiction novels on my own as an independent publisher as well.
Wow.
I've got 22 years background in theater as an actor and director,
Oh,
which
wow.
has very much informed my writing style and the things that or the way that I approach storytelling. And a few years ago, I got to write for the comic book Spawn, which was
Wow.
probably the best job I've ever had. That was a really
Yeah.
cool gig.
That's really cool. What did you write about with them? That's really cool.
I'm trying to remember the arc. We were introducing a new villain into
wow.
the series, which was cool. So like I can't remember what issue it is. That's 269 or something.
Yeah.
2 something. But there's, I've got panels in there that are, forever lodged in Spawn lore. Like, that's my guy. I wrote my guy.
That's
Super
so cool. Yeah, that is really,
for
really
sure.
cool. So talk a little bit about some of your books that you're written. What type of books do you write? What area you write?
So the main things that I read about the traditionally published work that I did, the original hardcovers, would be found in young adult, which was still a fairly hot genre at the moment, but it was really just starting to happen when I sort of stumbled into it. I didn't know that's what I was writing until my agent told me that's what I was writing.
Yeah.
So I focus on that. A lot of it is very focused on relationships, and not like the CW, but like,
yeah.
no, is CW still a thing? I don't remember.
I don't even know. That's
But
fun.
I focus on what I would consider origin stories. And if you're, familiar with comic book stuff, it's, how did Wolverine become Wolverine and so on. And in my way of thinking, high school in particular, junior high and high school, is all of our origin stories, particularly in the United States.
Absolutely.
We're discovering what our superpowers are, what our weaknesses are, who our adversaries are going to be, who our sidekicks are going to be, all these kinds of things. And that's such an exciting time to write about. So I focus a lot on younger people kind of in that age range. And then I'm also very drawn to not necessarily supernatural, but like horror elements, scary stuff, monsters and things like that, because there are so many parallels in horror. Stephen King, in one of his books, said, essentially, horror is always about something else.
Yeah.
And I really take that to heart. And you can tell the difference. If you're a horror fan, you can tell the difference between something that's like, hey, it's a slasher movie. Like, I could care less about slasher movies, but a really good actual horror movie has got so many layers to it, even while it's scaring you to death,
Yeah.
So those are my 2 favorite things to work in.
Yeah, so my family would tell you I'm scared to death of horror movies, right? I'm not lying. I love the first part, the superhero thing is great, but my family loves horror movies. They all are so into it, and horror books and all that. So I definitely refer them. TomLeveen.com is you can see all of Tom's books, and I'll make sure that that's in the end in the write up. But so yeah, that's really cool. We talked a lot about before creative writing. We were talking about my daughter, Lainey, and you and all that. And when you have it and you can write like that, it's such a gift. And not many people have that gift in my mind. A lot of people have the gift, but they just don't know how to do it. Right. And yeah, creative writing. Talk a little bit about that. You said it really goes back to your theater days and all that. Talk a little bit about how you think that helped you.
Sure. I do think that all of us as human beings, are storytellers. Now, does that mean everybody can write a novel? Not necessarily. But I do firmly believe that every single one of us is a storyteller. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're doing it right now.
Exactly.
You know?
We sure are.
So for someone, for example, who feels as though they can't write a book, I would say, cool, don't write a book. Do an interview.
Yeah.
or have somebody interview you and transcribe it. And, you know, there's all kinds of ways to capture the stories that we need to tell. And I encourage everybody to do that. I mean, with social media the way it is today, there's zero reason for people to not be on one or more talking about the things that they care about,
Yeah.
because someone else out there needs to hear it. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
So I started writing in second grade, and it just kind of never really stopped. I just didn't take it seriously until 13 or 14 years ago, maybe. But I did spend a couple decades doing theater as an actor and director. And the thing about that, the problem with it, frankly, was that it became very addictive because as a storyteller, as someone who is very passionate about telling stories, it became a quick hit. I choose a show as a director, I cast it, we rehearse it, it gets up and it's done, and we do 2 or 3 weeks of the run and we make a little money maybe. Well,
Yeah.
that's 8 weeks, and now I can move on to the next one.
Yeah.
I write a novel, well, and then we got to revise it, and then we got to get an agent, and then we got to get an editor, and this takes 2, 3, maybe more years depending on your luck.
Yeah.
So doing theater is like boom, storytell, bam, and you're done, and you can move on to the next one.
Yeah.
But I do encourage writers of all kinds to spend some time in theater. They don't have to be actors or anything like that. They can just sweep the stage for all I care.
Yeah.
But seeing how actors and directors work with each other, building characters,
Yes.
because how you know, day one of rehearsal, that cold read as we call it, to how it ends up being performed is night and day.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
watching that transition over the course of weeks, I think, can really inform anyone's storytelling. So that had a big impact.
Yeah. So the cold read, as you called it, you read the character, but then you become the character by the end.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're making little adjustments and changes all throughout that. Like, well, it doesn't sound right if we do it this way. Let's try it that way. And
Yeah.
that's really how stories, how novels get kind of scaffolded. You might say scaffolding, to build that. So that was a big impact.
Yeah, that's really cool. And so we've been talking, we talked an hour on the phone before this, but we talked about we all have a story. I mean, and I believe we do. We all have a story. And that's one of the things that I was telling you, I've been, in combat. I've I've done some pretty exciting things, right? That I feel like I could talk about and write and people could relate to it, but it's just learning how that process works,
Mhm.
and it is a process. So let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that process because hopefully we're going to, you'll be able to teach people that process and
Mhm.
guide people into your courses of how to do this. Because like I said, I've written not the whole thing, but I've written 6 chapters of it, and it still evolves on the daily, but it's been sitting there because I have no clue how to do this process or go about this process. So talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit.
So every story, every good story that we've enjoyed throughout history has the same basic elements. Somebody wants our hero, our protagonist, whatever word you want to use, our main character. Our hero wants something. Something is in the way, and the story is about how they try to overcome whatever that obstacle is, and what are the consequences of success and failure. That's about as short as you can do it. There are a number of different outlines that people use. For example, the hero's journey is very popular. A lot of people, more probably in colleges, I might be taught in high school as well a little bit. That's kind of the main template that people have heard of, but you don't have to follow that. You don't have to lockstep in that. All you need is somebody who wants something that they are either realistically or metaphorically ready to die for. Now that can be, I'm going to ask this girl to prom. Because if you remember sophomore year, junior year, that's a life or death situation, man.
Right.
You know?
Well, when you think about right now, these poor guys and girls, I mean, they're not getting to go to their proms this year.
That's a problem.
That's a
That's a
problem.
conflict.
That is a very
And
big conflict because
yeah,
that's when I think back to high school, just like you just said. I mean, I think back to going to the prom and how important that was to me still to this day in my life.
critical. Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So when we're crafting a story, regardless of if it's a nonfiction, so your story about the military and the things you've been through, for example, that's not fiction. That's going to be nonfiction, right?
Yeah,
But it's still a
absolutely.
story.
It
It's
is.
not a workbook. It's not a technical manual. It's a story.
Yeah.
So here's Matt, and here's what he wanted, and here's what got in the way, and here's how he went about trying to defeat that thing. And maybe he won, and maybe he lost, but the winning and losing isn't the important part. That's the thing. Did
Yeah.
Indiana Jones get the ark? Yes. Oh, wait, did he?
Yeah.
Not really, so, and do we care? No.
Yeah.
We're watching
The story
him
unfolds.
struggle to do
Yeah.
that. It's a story is about struggle. Every good story is about struggle.
Well, and it ties back to life, right? Everybody can relate to
Hmm.
this because in life we go through peaks, we go through valleys. We go through
Yep.
peaks, we go through valleys. And it's
Hmm.
how we overcome that and what we do. What are the lessons learned? How can we transition through that story and get better or get
Exactly.
to the end and become the hero or
Yeah.
become successful, so to speak.
Yes. Yes.
That's right. And we all go through those struggles, right? And that's what's
Hmm.
beautiful about it is because when you do read a book or you do, I think me personally, when I read a book or I go through a book, I put myself in that book. I
Yeah.
relate it to my life.
Hmm.
And I think that's key.
Yeah. That's what good writers do. They transport us. I mean, fundamentally, I am after the escape, and I want to provide that escape
Hmm.
for people. I remember before I'd published, I was probably in my first year of college, and I sent a novel off, and this was back with the dot matrix printers, with the
Yeah.
tractor paper you got to tear off and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Printed off a novel, sent it off to my friend in New York, who was kind of an English guy. And was like, "Yeah, give me some feedback," and he did. And then he said, by the way, I gave it to my sister. And I'd never met his sister before. I was like, "What are you doing, man? You can't just give my stuff to people I've never met." What did she think? And
Yeah.
he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, she really liked it, this and that." And he's like, "Well," and then she gave it to a friend of hers. I'm like, "No, you can't just
Yeah,
give
you
my
took my
stuff to
stuff.
somebody."
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I said, "But what did she think?" Because
Yeah.
I don't know. And the thing about that occurred to me a few days after this conversation was that here's two people I've never met, I'm never gonna meet,
Yeah.
but for half hour each day, whenever they read it, they weren't thinking about the bills or sick grandma or whatever, and that I'm gonna use the word power because
Yeah.
that's an incredible gift for all of us as storytellers to give to people. Like right now during this crisis in March, April of 2020, man, storytellers and art makers are so important.
Yeah.
Like, let me just watch something or read something that gets me out of this terrible story that's happening outside the house.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible thing to be able to give people.
It is. It really is. And so I'm a speaker and I do a lot of public speaking, not to take it off topic of the writing, but I was telling you, I got to speak to a hospital the other day. But the flow of speaking to this hospital about what crisis that were going on, I was asked to come in and talk about resiliency and, positivity and leadership. Um,
Hmm.
and so, but I started with my story. I started with in November 2000 or September 2001, September 11th, 2001, how I was ready to deploy. I talked about, going and being, helping plan it with General Mattis and then being in Afghanistan in 2001. And I talked about how important it was at that point in time, how the country was behind, but more importantly for me, my wife was so important to me.
Hmm.
And then I talked about being an air medical pilot, doing 659 flights, air medical flights, and seeing people's lives change on a dime. And then I
Yeah.
talked about how important it was for me to have a wife that stood by me the whole time.
Hmm.
So I talked about how I had been out on the front lines making a difference. And then I transitioned to, and now it's you guys. You guys are the ones out on the front lines. And then I
Yeah.
said, hey, but I want to tell you that the other day I asked my wife to send a picture of her to me from work, and she's in full PPE and she has the full coverage because she works in an emergency department as a
Oh
nurse.
my gosh.
And I said, so now where she supported me all those times, now it's my job to support her, and not just
Mhm.
for her, but it's our job to support you because you guys are the heroes out there right now for the country.
Yeah.
You guys are on the front line. So it is, and it worked out really well because I built up to that story, Um,
Yeah.
but it's a true story. It's from the heart, and I
Hmm.
think that it's about being able to transition that, like you said, in
Hmm.
speech or in words. I just can't do it in words on paper.
We're gonna fix that.
Yeah, we're gonna fix that. We're gonna fix that. That's good. Um, so if you are going to advise somebody, right?
Mhm.
You know, how would you tell somebody to get started writing a book? What would you tell them? You know?
I think the first thing that comes to mind, honestly, is the habit of taking notes in whatever way, shape, or form that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're all familiar with that flash of brilliance you get in the shower, right? And when we're driving, there's always that moment like, oh my gosh, I should write that, or when we wake up dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a joke, man. You got to write that stuff down.
Yeah.
For me, like what I do, for example, is I love my phone, and I will either type something out in the notes, or more frequently, I'll just leave an audio note, or I'll do a transcription
Yeah.
note into my notes, because like especially when you're driving or something like that, like you gotta be Johnny on the spot with that.
That's
For
so
other
perfect
people,
because I forget about it all the time. I had the best thought in the world. I'm like, I'm getting ready to change the entire world with this thought. And I'm like, how was I going to change the world? You know?
Right? It's on some sticky note somewhere. So that's the number one thing is we have to write those ideas down, whether or not they ever get used. For my first novel, for example, my wife and I had to wait, I don't know, 6 or 9 months before we went on our honeymoon, because we just opened a theater venue. And we're driving out of Santa Barbara, and I was out of absolutely nowhere. I was like, write this down. She was used to it by that point. So, she's always ready. And I dictated this short little paragraph to her about this character, just popped into my head, and she's like, okay, and stuffed it in her purse, and there it was for however long. And flash forward, I don't know how many years later, that little paragraph became,
Wow.
grew to a character that became the first chapter in my first novel.
Oh, wow.
And that's the point, is you never know when that stuff's going to come back. So rule number one is write everything down, whatever it works, however it works for you. Another thing I think to do in terms of getting started, I do believe that the interview process is good. Having somebody who knows you, or that you're comfortable with, who can just ask you those questions that lead you one thing to the next. Like, I mean, even just listening to you talk about the stuff let's do just the military, which is, however many years of your career, right?
Yeah.
We could sit here for maybe an hour, and I could ask you 5, 6, 7 questions at most. And you would fill a novel. You would fill a book length thing of just stories. I would then record that. I would have that recorded, and then either transcribe it yourself or send it out for transcription or whatever. And guess what? You now have an entire manuscript in raw form. Now it needs to be published, or excuse me, needs to be revised. It needs to be polished. But now you've got something to work with. And the number one, far and away, the biggest issue I see with writers or storytellers is not finishing that draft, whatever it is. And so getting started is just writing it down or recording it in some way, documenting the process.
I like that idea because to me, if you are interviewing me and asking me questions, you're asking me, instead of me just, regurgitating what I think is important, you're asking me what you would be interested in. And I'm talking about what I would be interested in. And in all likelihood, it's what other people would be interested in hearing as well. Yeah.
Precisely. And I think that's, I have never written a book for somebody in that way. As a lot of veterans have books out about their experience and across different fields. And you always see, written by so-and-so with, whoever. And my guess is most of that with author is going to be them interviewing the person who, wrote the book.
Yeah.
That's my guess.
The guessing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's interesting because I hadn't thought about that, pretty cool.
I tell it to authors as well, because I see a lot of authors who, will do a book launch at a bookstore or something like that. And they're so uncomfortable because writers, we just want to be home alone. Don't bother us, And one of the things I will advise new authors to do is, like, if that's you, if you're not comfortable, I'm a theater kid, so I can do jazz hands all night.
Yeah.
If that's not your thing, or like you're a speaker, you'll be fine. No big deal. If you're not comfortable, bring somebody with you to the event who can interview you on stage.
Yeah.
And you're so much more relaxed and just, easy, and it makes life a lot simpler for everybody. So I'm a big fan of interviews to get that kind of thing done.
Yeah, I think that's outstanding. I think that's really good because, really just diving into my story, diving into my thought process of why, well, one, what's your story? But then I always think it's interesting to it would be interesting to come back and interview you after I read one of your book and just say, well, what was your thought process in this? How did and that's what we need to do. That'll be our next interview. I'll read one of your books and then I'll come back in and say, well, what may what made you think this? You know, how did you, in
Mhm.
your mind, what were you thinking? What process were you going through and thinking through that?
And that's one of those things I might not know until you ask.
Yeah.
And that's why it's such a great technique, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's what we need to do. Yeah, we're gonna do that. So you have to
Right
tell me
on.
which book to read. Just don't give, maybe not the scariest one because then I have nightmares. Here I'm a hard Marine, but don't want to read
That
the
amuses
scary
me.
book. That's funny. That's actually funny. No, the story is Friday the 13th, right? Everybody's seen Friday the 13th. That's the
Mhm.
movie. So Jason, obviously, I had watched it. I was pretty young, and I watched it with my mom. And
Right on.
then yeah, I know why my mom was letting me watch that when I was really young. But we watched it together, and then we watched it back. I was on the old VHS tape. We watched it back.
Yes.
My brothers were home and some other people. So my mom and I thought it was over, and we stopped it. Well, it was still playing the second time, and we hadn't seen this part when Jason comes out of the water when the girl's in the boat.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, man. That was it. From that moment forward, that scared me so bad. I've never wanted to watch another horror movie because I'm sitting there being the funny guy because I'd already seen it. I knew it was coming. I'm the
Mhm.
funny little kid, being a little smart, what? And then I end up the scaredest out of the whole room by the end.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it caught me. It caught me. But yeah. That's a true story. That's it. That's it. All right. So building a course. If you were going to build a course, which you have a course, what are your different classes? How do you teach that class?
So there's three things I would say. The first is that I have a book out currently about dialogue, because dialogue is hard to do. A lot of people fall flat on dialogue. I am frankly fairly exceptional at it, and because of the theater. Because
Yeah.
if you think about it, that's all you get. You
Yeah.
know, even if we take, and I talk about it at the end of the book, if you take a big Broadway show like The Lion King or Les
Yeah.
Mis or whatever, and there's an element of spectacle to it, Hamilton, whatever,
Yeah.
that's cool. That's what you're paying, $100 for. Great. But those actors had better be able to stand on stage in their street clothes and belt that thing out without any costume, anything special. Because if they can't, they don't belong up there.
Yeah.
Right. And so in theater, we are so reliant on that dialogue. Like, you have to have those spoken words so much in your blood.
Yeah.
That just happened. That's the thing that I grew up with and the thing that I studied most. So that's what I rely upon in my fiction. So I teach a class about that. I've taught that at several different conferences and conventions and schools all over the place. I also have a class available on description, because that's then the next piece is like,
Yeah.
well, is it red or is it crimson or is it vermilion, or no,
Yeah.
it's actually just red. It's okay to
Yeah.
say red.
Yeah.
And that's getting kind of more at a deeper level on the craft and technique. But aside from that, the thing that I've realized after having published is the things that are missing from writing classes. And the things that are missing from writing classes are the real life things. I think artists and creatives tend to isolate and segregate that part of their life. They say, well, I'm a writer from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. or whatever, and they do that. And then they have to go deal with taking care of a sick parent,
Yeah.
or their day job or whatever it is they're doing. And I'm coming at it saying, no, your whole life is part of your creative endeavor, whatever it is. You can't, if you're in the middle of a divorce, tell me that's not going to impact your writing.
Yeah.
Right? It is. It just is.
Yeah.
So the classes, I like to either bring this up in my classes as a sidebar, or develop entire courses about starting from ground zero. Like, before we even talk about how are you going to write that book, I want to know what your budget is. Do you have a budget? If you don't have a budget, you better get one, because as soon as Random House calls and starts offering you money, you're going to want a budget.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you stories about people who are very successful. They sold their first novel and they make 6 figures, 7 figures sometimes, and forgot that that's taxable income.
Yeah.
Oh, you might want to know about that. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So we talk about, my thing is the ABCs. We do art, business, and craft of fiction. And we're going to talk about, like, are you eating enough spinach?
Yeah.
Are you taking care of your physical body? The idea of, the scotch drinking, cigarette smoking author, hunched down in front of his Underwood.
Yeah.
Great, but you're going to be dead when you're 50. Don't you
Yeah.
want to write until you're 90?
Yeah.
I do. We
Yeah.
need to take care of your body, your mind, your soul, everything. And then we need to talk about the story and the
Yeah.
dialogue and the character and all that kind of
Absolutely.
stuff. So I'm looking at it from as holistic a way as I possibly can. I want to talk about your whole life and make sure that that is as lined up as possible to enable you to tell the best story and to enjoy the success you then get from it.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's actually awesome to think about it that way, because that's a
Mhm.
different way than most people would think. I mean, most people
No
think,
one's talking about it.
no,
That's the thing.
most people think, okay, I'm going to do a class. I'm going to learn how to write a book. This person's going to
Mhm.
tell me how to write the introductory. This person's going
Yeah.
to tell me how to write the preamble. This person's going to tell me how to write, whatever, chapter
Yeah.
one, chapter two, and not the holistic view of the
Yeah.
writing and how it should go on.
Yeah. And we do both. I mean, there's
Yeah.
obviously, and
Oh,
we
there's
also are talking about all those writing technique type stuff, but I just don't feel like we can isolate that.
Well, that's more important. That's so important. You got to take a
Yeah.
holistic view of that. Yeah, that's really fascinating. That's really cool. I hadn't thought about it that way, which is good. And I told
Yeah.
you I'll be the first one, take your class, because I'm in the 7-year process here, the 6 7 year
Yeah.
process.
We all are.
But I
Everybody
have to
is.
slow down. I have to slow down and do it. And it's funny, when you go to Convene and you talk about, what we've been talking about Convene and all that, the tagline of it is real life, real people, real experience,
Mhm.
so that's the tagline. The tagline is, we all have a real life. We all have, we're all real people, and we all have
Mhm.
real experience. And all of those things play into our story. They
Yes.
play into our story, and we all have a story. But the key thing is where, again, and some people think that, well, my story, I'm over here, I'm by myself. No, you
Mhm.
have so many people that you're in common with, that have the
Mhm.
same likes, that have the same passions, that have the same problems, that have to go through the same things that you go through. You can
Yeah.
connect to anybody, whether or not
Yes.
you're writing fiction or you're writing nonfiction, or
Mhm.
or whatever story that you had. There you can do it. You can really talk
Yeah.
about it in a different
Yeah.
area.
And writing is a great way, whether you're wanting to even publish or not necessarily, or whether you're trying to quote unquote make money off it or not. The things you can learn about other people and that you can learn about yourself in the process is huge. I mean, that's why we keep journals and diaries and whatever else, or blogs or what have you. It's to establish those connections. Like, oh, I didn't know you also liked whatever this thing is. It's huge, hugely important.
Yeah. So if you were to give advice, because we've been talking about this, if you were to give advice to a 16-year-old creative writer, and we've been
Hmm.
talking about my daughter Lainey, she is a creative writer. She loves writing. She writes poetry, but she also writes creative writing. What would you tell her as somebody, as a young mind? And I'll tell you this: she has that mind who she thought. I'm pointing over here because we have woods beside us. She thought she was Katniss Everdeen, from the Hunger Games.
Yes.
She believed in her mind she was Katniss Everdeen every
Yep.
day, dressed up like her, running
Oh,
around in the woods with a bow and arrow, shooting the bow and arrow. She was Katniss Everdeen. And then she got her black belt in Taekwondo.
oh yeah.
But she loved everything there was about China and about, culture and all that. But she immersed herself, and that's her
Hmm.
personality. She immerses herself in that. So what kind of advice, because I'm going to have her watch this, because we've talked about her a little bit, but I want to have her watch this. What advice would you give her to expand her
There
creativity and her writing?
two things, particularly for that age range, because there are a lot of younger people like myself who their schedule was they wake up, they go to school, they come home, they write, they do their homework, they go to sleep, and they repeat that every single day. Okay, cool. Glad you're doing your homework and glad you're going to school. Super. But they are not out having adventures.
Yeah.
Now, as of this recording today, and April 2020, we can't go out and have many adventures because we're in quarantine and this terrible thing is happening. We won't be here forever.
Yeah.
One day the doors are going to open, the sun's going to shine, and we're going to need to get out. If you're, I don't care if you're 12 or 16 or 26 or whatever, you have to get out and have adventures. You
Yeah.
have to go out and do stuff. You don't have to jump out of a plane. I'm not gonna, but you should go do things that are challenging, that are difficult, things that scare you. Go to other places, meet other people. One of the biggest, when you get to early 40s, you start, well, I've pretty much been everywhere and done everything. I've kind of done my thing. Well, then I had an opportunity to go to Germany with my wife on a book tour. Didn't expect that. So we had this 10-day tour in Germany. And the last time I'd been to Europe, I was 16. And my biggest excitement was, dude, they'll sell you wine at Pizza Hut. Oh! So I didn't get a lot out of that trip.
Yeah.
As an adult, though, and spent so much time with the people there, was like, wow, the United States is very different, which I know sounds ridiculous, but until you've seen it and experienced it, like having two oceans on either side of us changed everything about our culture. It's just an amazing experience. But if you're 16, like, well, cool, get on your bike or get in the car, do, you know, whatever you've got, and go do other things, go do absolutely new things. Because if you don't, have nothing to write about. That's, I think, the thing. And if for whatever reason you can't, or it's more difficult for you than it is for other people, I totally get it. Regardless, you have to read, because writers are readers, and you need to read across genres. You need to read nonfiction, fiction, read stuff you don't like, read stuff you love, pick it apart. Hopefully there is an independent bookstore nearby. Get on that email list, find out when authors are coming, and go sit and listen to authors talk for a little bit, even if it's not a book you would normally pick up. Because if you can form, like for someone like her, and she's writing a short story or novel or something like that, which is not unusual, and she crafts one really good writing question for that author, we love to talk about it. So you craft one good question, you go to that author's event, and when it's Q&A, say, hey, how do you handle triangles? Or what's a good way to outline your book, or something like that. Don't say, you know, how do you get an agent? You know, Google it. Okay. But having one-on-one connections with another author changes everything. So those are the main things I recommend all authors do, but specifically, younger writers, connect with other authors, and go have adventures, man. Go have adventures. Get out of the house, turn off Netflix.
Turn off Netflix and TikTok and,
you can't write a story about that, you know. You can't.
Absolutely. And that's really cool. I can't wait to have her watch this and just take that advice. And because it's fun to read what she writes. It's fun to just see her mind and see her thoughts. And all that. So that's really cool. It's a gift. If you know, it is a gift. I do think you're right. I think anybody can write. Everybody has a story, but when you have the gift, you have a gift, and that's really, really cool. So so cool, man. This is really awesome. Well,
thanks. Yeah.
You know, I appreciate you coming on to the show today, and I look forward to working with you. I'm trying to twist the arm. I think it's going to happen. I hope so. But you know, we're trying to start a writing community where we're bringing writers together, where we can learn from each other. Not just that, you can share your stuff, share your information, share your writings, where people can collaborate. I mean, while we were going through this and sitting here thinking about it, I'm like, well, how cool would it be to just, you know, have people come in and write, you know, and you know, put a prompt out there. You know, I showed you some writing earlier of a prompt my daughter did, but put a prompt out there and say, hey, let's see what you got. Let's everybody write, you know, and in there, and then people can communicate and collaborate on it and learn from each other and all that stuff. So there's no
prompts are very valuable. And then also, you know, learning how to critique is important, and because you also have to learn how to take one and be able to differentiate, because there's a world of difference. And this happens, people ask me about writing groups all the time, and like, well, should I join a writer's group or whatever? And I'm like, well, it depends. If your writer's group is a bunch of people sitting around a table saying, I liked it, I didn't like it, what do I do with that? I do nothing. If it's a writer's group that's saying, you know what, chapter 1 was really good, but then chapter 2 kind of was a little flat for me. The characters didn't seem very well developed. Okay, well, now that's actionable. I can do something with that. So that's wildly important.
It is so important. And you know, as a counselor type, you know, some people don't take criticism real well, but you got to take criticism is not personal, you know, especially if
it shouldn't be.
That. It's not. If you know, and again, also it's how you deliver the criticism and the critique and all that. You know, if you're constructive and you're trying to help people out, then it's good. But
it's a skill.
But you also have to take it, right?
Yep. Both sides of that are a skill.
It is a skill. It is
for writers and artists.
Yeah, it is, and speakers, you know, and
speakers,
that's right. So all of and pilots and all, you know. So so really with anything. I mean, you got to be able
Yeah.
to talk and take criticism and learn from it.
Mhm.
That is
Yeah, for
really,
sure.
that is really cool. So tomleveen.com, you can find him there.
Mhm.
Yeah. What other social media sites do you have?
Pretty much all of them, as long as it's, again, if you spell the last name right, I'll be at Tom Leveen pretty much everywhere.
Okay, so I'll make sure I get those in an email from you, and I'll put them into the blog, the write up, and all that. So again, hopefully we'll be seeing more. All right, give me an assignment. Tell me one of your books to read, and because I would love to
Uh,
come back and do a different podcast. Now, don't scare me, but
No, no, no. I think, okay, for you, I think I'm going to recommend, because of the counseling and everything, I would be fascinated to hear your response to my most recent novel, which is a book called Mercy Rule.
okay.
And it's a multiple perspective, set in high school, right? Kind of the events leading up to an act of school violence.
Oh wow.
And it's, I'm going to use the word fun sort of in quotes, because it's not fun, but it sees the situation from so many different points of view, and you're really not sure who it is that's going to do this terrible thing until it happens. And it's a really, really good read, and I would be fascinated to hear your take on it.
So Mercy Rule.
Mercy Rule.
Where can I get that?
That should be available on Amazon or any other major bookseller. You can get it through, if you want to support local independent bookstores, go through IndieBound online.
Okay.
But yeah, pretty much anywhere books are sold.
Okay, cool. Yep, I'll get that. I'll read it and we'll go through it because I would love to see that. That's a big thing to me. I was telling you before, we have a big, huge event coming up, where it's for, high school kids. We're hoping to have 10,000 high school kids in a virtual online platform. But, there's so much that goes on with kids, so much that goes on nowadays with bullying and cyberbullying and different types of bullying. And,
Well, this will be a good read for that.
and how kids react. I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons I told you a lot of on Convene. One of the biggest things about it is the anonymity piece to it.
Yeah.
Where you can write experience as yourself, or you can, and when you answer questions, you're anonymous. Well, where that came from, I'll just quick story that came from Lainey, where she was getting cyberbullied at the time when she was younger. And I asked her is when we were in the building process, I said, "Hey, Lainey, can you write an experience for me?" And so she was writing, her name is Lainey, and she was writing it from the perspective of Olivia. And so she was writing about it. So she was writing, and basically it was almost like a little short story about Olivia being cyberbullied on Instagram. Right. And she kept turning to me and she was going, "Dad, they won't know it's me, will they? They won't know it's me that wrote this, will they?" And but she wanted to reach out and ask ask for advice. She wanted to reach out and see what other people's thoughts would be on the situation. And so, we allow for that ability to write anonymously inside the platform to get people's feedback. But yeah. So I'm looking forward to reading that. I'll order it today. We'll read it and then we'll schedule another one and we'll talk about it,
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that ties in perfectly with that. It's very much about bullying and the consequences of dismissal.
Yeah.
Because from where I come from, there's a difference between rejection and dismissal. Because if I ask somebody out to the prom, or I send out a book to get published or something like that, and they say no, that's a rejection and it hurts, but at least somebody made contact. Whereas one of the things the book kind of talks about is there's that, and then there's like just nothing. That hurts, man. You don't exist. That hurts a lot. And getting teens in particular for me, and junior high and high school to write about this stuff, I think is immensely helpful. I've gotten classrooms of kids to write about the things that make them angry. If you think you've got somebody who doesn't know how to write, ask them what pisses them off. Oh, they'll write. They will start writing.
I showed you that community earlier, the real world, and the high school class used the app and they wrote about it. And there's some raw experiences in there, and they're anonymous, but they wrote about how they feel, how they felt, in some different situations, and it's real. It's real.
It is. Oh, the stuff I've heard from students when I go to school visits and stuff like that, there's inevitably 2 or 3 kids who hang back after the bell rings and just start talking about this stuff. And I didn't believe them at first. The first couple of years, I'm like, no way did that happen. But the more I kept hearing stuff,
absolutely,
there's a pattern to it. Like this has got to change, man. And that's a big part of why I still like writing in that genre, as being a part of that change, hopefully, because it shouldn't be that way.
Well, you're speaking my language now because, as somebody with a degree in counseling, I
Mm-hmm.
really care about that. I really care about how we treat people,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think a lot of time, well, I think they do. I think people do know. I'd be lying. I'm making that up. They know how people know how they're making other people feel.
I think so.
It's just, do they care about it?
Yeah.
Do they care about it? And then in some cases, they don't know. They don't know that they're really hurting somebody's feelings. They're naive about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I always tell my kids, and this was what my father always told me, go back to the golden rule, right? Do unto others, that's done unto you. And I tell my kids this, I'm like, if it would hurt your feelings, don't do it. Because if it's hurting your feelings, it's hurting their feelings. And you always have to think about that. Don't,
Mm-hmm.
if you feel like this hurts you, it'll hurt them as well.
Yeah, I didn't finish college until just a few years ago. I was able to actually take the advance I got from my first novel and go back and finish college,
Oh, cool.
which I did. And at first, I was going to do creative writing because that made the most sense. And then about halfway through, I shifted over to family and human development, and that's ultimately what I got my Bachelor of Science in. And it was for that very reason. It's like, listen, I already know how to write a book. I don't need to go to school to learn how to write a book. What I need to know is what's all this background stuff on the stuff that I'm writing about, and I communicate that to people who are experiencing it. So yeah, definitely high up on my priority list when it comes to writing for younger people.
Well, and that's right, because I love that. I'm glad we got into this conversation before we ended it, because now your writing is very pointed. Your writing can make a point and make a difference in people's lives, and it will. If they go through the process of reading it, immerse themselves in it, either one side or the other. Hopefully, they'll come out the other side with a different perspective on life.
I think so.
What you need to do.
Yeah,
that's very impressive. That's incredible. I love that. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So we're a lot alike in that respect as well. So that's cool.
Yeah, for sure.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you for being on this. Again, you can find tomleveen.com. I'll have all this in the podcast and the blog. And I'll read the book. I'll get going. I'm going to ask some other people to read the book. Maybe what we do is we get multiple people to come back, and we'll do a multiple talking about the book, like a book review and stuff like that. That would be really cool.
It's going to look like a big book. It's not. It flies by. It's a very fast read.
Okay, good, because I'm a horrible reader too, Now you're really speaking my language. No, that's good. Like I said, that's right down my alley. I think it's good, but we can get a lot of good out of it. So
I think so.
I appreciate it. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And this won't be the last. It's the first of many, I hope. So
sounds good.
Thank you.